This is Launching Your Daughter podcast, and I'm your host, Nicole Burgess, licensed marriage and family therapist. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional. Now, here is today's episode. Episode 42. Well, welcome everybody. I am so excited today because my guest is Tara Spears, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist, licensed mental health counselor, and a certified sex therapist. She has over 10 years of experience working with individuals, children, families, and couples encountering a variety of hardships. After spending most of her career responding reactively to situations or intervening after a crisis, such as a child's removal from home, a failed adoption, or in the aftermath of abuse, Ms. Spears has decided to take a more proactive approach. Her newest mission is Talk Sex With Me, and it is to assist creating a safe and supportive online community. And I'm so excited to talk to you today, Tara, because sex is a big topic for teenagers, and sometimes it's a struggle for parents to actually have these conversations with their kids. So I'm really excited to have you on today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And you're absolutely right. That became abundantly clear to me when I had my children. They're not teens yet, but they're old enough to start asking questions that I was surprised that they would start to ask at their age. I mean, my oldest is 7 and the youngest is 4. And just recently she asked, the 7-year-old in particular asked, I know that you can make a baby every month. So she has, kind of the mechanics down. Mm-hmm. But why don't you?
Uh-huh.
And I was not, we muddled through it, but it's just, you're not prepared for those moments. Mm-hmm. It's not like they submit a question into a box and then you get to go and perfect this really refined answer and come back and fine tune all the nuances. So these conversations are tricky to navigate. And what you said in terms of working proactively versus reactively, I spent a great many years in the child welfare system working with children following removal or shelter into care. And one of the largest problems that we have with placement stabilization is behaviors. Mm-hmm. And sexual behavior in particular is really difficult for families to manage. And so there was just kind of this culmination of me as a mom grappling with answering questions that were really hard in tandem with recognizing that there were multiple applications for use of a safe support system for parents and caregivers alike to know where to go to get answers.
Yeah. And that's great because, again, it's based on, your experience and what you're seeing and what you're hearing from parents and even in your own experience, right? Kids will, in the moment, especially the younger ones, if they're in the moment, they're just going to ask, depending on where they've heard things. And it's like, what do I say to that? I'm not too sure. So, and I know today our conversation, this is more for the older kids, but we'll definitely talk a little bit about, because I know some of my parent listeners, they also have some of the younger daughters as well. And like, okay, what do I do? So how do you talk to parents who have a teenage daughter about what are some of the, kind of ways to support parents to have conversations with their daughters regarding about sex, body parts, their values, all of that? How do you support them in that journey to have those conversations?
Well, first I would say to parents, be candid and be honest.
Yeah.
So we're talking about teenagers here and not those earlier years where you're doing that fine dance between what's age appropriate and what's also honest at the same time to share. You don't have to do as much of that dance with teens. You can be a little bit more transparent, and there's great value in being as such, because if you lie to them, they're going to figure that out quickly. So first I would start by saying, be honest. What I said about in terms of if you don't tell them, they're going to find it out. They're going to learn online. They're going to learn from their peers. They're going to learn from experience. They're going to get the information that they need and want because they're curious. Mm-hmm. And so you have this very unique opportunity to give them the information, but to shape that information in a way that is determined by your values. And so one of the things that I start preparing parents to do before engaging in this conversation is let's take a time out and first assess what are your values, you parent or caregiver, what are your values pertaining to sex? Because sex is going to have meaning determining based upon those values.
Right.
So in the absence of those values, your child is going to create a meaning of sex that may not be the meaning you would intend for her or him to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. When we don't know what our values are, which that really drives everything that we do in life, it makes those conversations a lot more challenging and sometimes confusing on the other end of that when you're receiving it. Like, what are you trying to tell me? I don't get it. So I love how just having the parents pause for a moment, reflect back on what their guiding tools are in their own life, meaning the values, then they can go about having more of a conversation with their daughter that they understand where they're coming from. And then it gives the opportunity for the daughter to ask a few more questions about like, oh, help me understand. I'm not too sure what you're trying to get across.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because the kids are going to learn the mechanics from school. Most parents are agreeing to allow for them to have that type of education in school. And I think many parents go the book route too, like, surprise, there's a book on your bed, go read that. But what's missing in that is they have all the mechanical information without a concept or an understanding of what sexuality is and what it means.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Tell me a little more then. So as the parents, now they understand their values a little more, they're able to articulate that to their teenager. What would be, guess, the next step versus, yeah, like you're saying, it's like the mechanics throwing the book at them saying, go read that type of thing. What are some things that parents can do to then help kind of guide their teenager a little more about, sex, sexuality, all of that? What could they do?
Well, there's two streams of thought that come to mind. One, you can force the issue, or you can say, hey, I want to talk to you about, I noticed that you're really interested in boys or girls or whatever. You can kind of broach the subject yourself. That's one idea. And I go over ways in the online training about how to set a stage for a successful conversation if you feel like you haven't already created the rapport or relationship with your child to begin having these conversations organically. One way is to force it. The other is to take advantage of opportunities that come up. So I gave the example of my 7-year-old asking why I don't make a baby every month. Yeah. That was so fun.
Yeah.
Children are going to give you, and teens are going to give you, natural opportunities to have this conversation so it is more organic and it is more of an ongoing dialogue. And I think that's a misperception that parents have. I've been at many presentations and I'll see parents walk by and they're like, oh, we're good. We've had this talk. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the kid's good for life?
Right.
Like, I don't understand that.
Yeah.
It should be an ongoing dialogue because your child is growing and changing, and her understanding of herself and others is evolving with her change.
That's a beautiful reminder. One, that having those organic conversations, meaning whether they've seen something on, maybe it's a movie that everybody's watching, or there's an ad that they've seen, or a friend has said something to them. It's like, okay, here we go. Let's talk about this. And you're right. It's not just a one-time, boom, we've had the conversation, we're done. Kids change, that development changes, their curiosity changes. If they've ever seen porn, that's the other part too, is recognizing healthy versus unhealthy relationships, and that whether it's power and control over whether it's mutual, there's so much that needs to be discussed and continued to be discussed. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. And I love your suggestion of, if you're watching a movie together, absolutely. I mean, if you're in a theater, it's a little awkward. You might have to revisit that in the car. But if you're sitting at home and you have the liberty to hit pause, then hit pause. Yeah. And say hey, that's really interesting. What do you think about that?
Absolutely.
So again, it is more organic, and your child has this sense of, oh, okay, whenever I have a question, I can come to you with this.
One thing, and maybe you probably go over this as well. I know sometimes when my parents are really nervous about having that and they're like, oh, I don't want to talk to them. And sometimes their teenager is, oh, I'm too embarrassed to talk to mom and dad. I will encourage, if there is a family, friend, relative, another adult that the parents trust and that daughter trusts, sometimes it's also having conversations with other adults in their life that it's kind of like one step removed from mom and dad. Doesn't mean that they're trying to hold secrets or anything, but that again opens up that conversation about sex, sexuality, getting comfortable with things. Do you also kind of offer that information to parents as well, or what?
I think what I would do in that situation and scenario is say that every parent is the expert on their child.
Mm-hmm.
So you know what makes your child most comfortable and relaxed. Is it going for a ride? Is it going for a walk together? Is it you spend the day together and at the end of it, you've had all this good bonding time and so she's in a good place to have a conversation with you. If you feel like there's going to be anxiety around the topic for both you and the child, then I would say don't approach it in a serious way.
Yeah.
Lighten it up.
Yeah. Love it.
And so some of the suggestions that I give to parents are games. For example, Jeopardy or trivia is a way that you can have this conversation with your teen in particular, and it becomes less about, okay, let's sit down and talk about the book that you read. Do you have any questions? Well, that's really awkward.
Right.
Yeah. But if you're playing Jeopardy and you're trying to see who's going to win and who's going to get the most points, particularly if there's multiple children in the home and then they're competing against one another, you're still having the conversation, but in a way that is fun and it kind of takes the edge off of things.
Oh, I love those suggestions. So yeah, because again, as we said earlier, it can be kind of nerve-wracking for the parents to begin these conversations and they're not too sure. So to make it more fun, less, serious, we've got to have this conversation right now. It helps both the parents and the teens to be able to open up that dialogue.
Correct. And even if that's your beginning, what a wonderful platform to establish in terms of we can talk about this and it doesn't have to be so scary.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm curious, one thing I know I wanted to talk with you about is what are some of the reasons parents do get stuck and not talking about sex with their teens, ways for them to get a little more comfortable about just having that dialogue with them?
Well, I think there's a multitude of reasons. One being the parent's lack of comfort with his or her own sexuality. Mm-hmm. So that could be from a variety of reasons that would be an entirely different rabbit trail to chase, mm-hmm. from a history of sexual abuse to their own values from their family of origin where, sex is serious or sex is not really something that's pleasurable. It's more for procreation or whatever it may be. But sometimes I think a parent's values can kind of trip them up and communicating with their child, particularly if they're in vastly different generations. And so the child is growing up in an age with different values pertaining to sex than the parent did.
Yeah, that's a good point. That if there's any trauma or abuse in the background or big time, just generational differences in the values, that can definitely impact that. So how do you then, again, kind of go back and help them feel a little more comfortable about just, again, opening up that dialogue, whether it's, as we talked earlier, really pausing and having them look at their values, but help them feel a little more comfortable in their own being?
Well, I would say once you've assessed your values, then there's a lot of value in determining what do I now want to give to my child? Yeah. Like what am I holding on to and what seems of most importance to pass on?
Beautiful. I love that.
Which is why these conversations really should start with a level of awareness on the parent's behalf.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because that, as you said earlier, that really is, that's that platform that when the parents are more comfortable with their own sexuality, their own belief system, their own values, it helps create a more trusting conversation that can go back and forth, and that the child feels or the teen feels a little more at ease to be able to have that conversation with them.
Correct. Yeah. So, I mean, if we had a mom who is not very confident in her own sexuality, and we have a 13-year-old girl who is getting a lot of attention, and she's very interested in responding to that attention, and she's trying to find her way through this, that's going to be a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I know parents also fear that, well, if I talk about it, if I address the pink elephant in the room, then I'm giving the elephant permission to exist.
Yes. Beautiful. Thank you for that point. Mm-hmm.
And I always find that while I appreciate the logic is semi-counterintuitive. So what you're saying is, I know there's there's all these years of evolution dependent upon your religious beliefs. You have a different timeline, but there's been some time of evolution that has bred into humanity the desire to continue the species. And that has to happen through sex.
Mm-hmm.
And this is natural and it's innate. And the reason my child is here is because I responded to that. So I know it's natural. I know that people do it, but I don't want to talk about it because that might make my child want to do it.
Mm-hmm. Which is not necessarily true.
No. Again, it's just very counterintuitive. We teach our children about everything, right? We teach them not to run on the road. We teach them not to touch a hot stove. We teach them good relationships and to be thankful and appreciative. And for some reason, when it comes to sex, we want to throw up a roadblock and say like, oh, they'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Well, they will. That's true. They will. But do you want their figuring it out to come from outside of your home? Because that's where it's going to come from.
Right. Yeah. So again, addressing the so-called elephant in the room and being able to have that dialogue about it doesn't equal, yes, they're going to automatically go out and have sex or become more sexually active by having the conversation. They will be more educated about
Correct.
choices and setting boundaries and what's
Correct.
appropriate and what is not. Yeah.
And understanding where your boundaries are coming from.
Mm-hmm.
So in the absence of that conversation, if you say you're not permitted to have sex, but you have no idea, like you haven't communicated to your child the wheres and whys of that, you're automatically setting a stage for a power struggle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. You've addressed one of the common fears or questions that you get regarding sex is about, I don't want to do it because I don't want to have this conversation because, they may actually go out and have sex. Are there any other questions, fears that you typically get from parents about what really keeps them stuck in having these conversations with their daughters and yes, their sons, but anything else that typically keeps them kind of stuck?
Just not knowing what to say.
Okay.
Yeah, not even knowing how to respond, how to answer. I think feeling like maybe they have to have all of the magical or right answers.
Yeah, that is so important for all my parent listeners out there. That just what you were saying, Tara, earlier is like when your daughter asked it, it's like, well, why aren't you having a kid every single month? It's like, in that moment, it's totally okay to pause. It's also okay to say, hey, that is a great question. Let me get back to you on that. I'm not, maybe it's you guys are out in the grocery store or something like that. And
Right.
That question pops up. It is totally okay to pause, but come back to that. And you don't have to have the perfect answer. It's just having the conversation together. And maybe it's, hey, we need to go to the doctor and have a conversation because I'm not too sure exactly what that would look like or what that means. And we can go there, or let's look that information up in the book that I had laid on your bed and
Right.
all of that. So yeah, love it. So I'm curious, what would be, I guess, I know the benefits of having these conversations, with the teenagers and all that. I know you do as well. For our parents, why is it so good to have conversations with their teens about sex, about sexuality, about their body, about the boundaries regarding sex? Why is that so good to have these conversations?
Yeah, I mean, we've touched on it certainly throughout this conversation. There's benefits for the child and for the family. So for the child, you're looking at less confusion just in general. less desire to keep secrets. So one of the things that is fun when you're a teenager about risk-taking behavior is that it's secret, it's clandestine. That's one of the things that makes affairs attractive to some people, is that there's all of this secrecy around it. So if you've established a culture in your home where your child has the ability to have this conversation with you without secrecy or shame, then you're kind of taking some of the thrill out of doing something behind mom and dad's back.
Right.
So that's good. Greater self-acceptance, I would certainly think for the teen who is, adolescence is brutal.
Yes, it is.
It's brutal. You are trying to figure out who you are with a flood of emotions that you aren't really capable of managing all that well. All with this desire to remain attached to people and trying to figure out who is safe and not safe to attach to. And it's a really tough time. So anything we can do for our girls to decrease confusion and increase sense of empowerment and understanding of themselves and others is intangible.
Yeah.
And also better understanding the meaning of sex. Again, sex is socially and culturally defined. So you, as the parent, get a very small window to shape the meaning that your child is going to place on sex. And this is your opportunity to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that, because the girls, they definitely, and even boys, I mean, they hear so much, a lot of misinformation about what it is and what relationships are supposed to look like. So this is, you can give them that foundation to say this is a more true meaning of it and how our family believes that it looks like, or our family values, and go from there. Very true.
Absolutely. Well, at its core, sex is relational.
Yes.
So, I mean, it takes two people to do it, right? So who is better at teaching your child that sex is relational than the person who loves your child the most, the person who loved your child first?
Right. Absolutely. Oh, this is just a great conversation. And I know, as you said, there's a lot of different rabbit holes we could totally go down and explore and go over for our parents. But I want to kind of shift just a little bit before we get to talk about kind of the training programs that you have online. What do you have any like books or even maybe a piece of advice to help parents regarding, again, this topic of being more comfortable in opening that dialogue up with their teenage daughter to be able to, again, to have these conversations about sex and sexuality?
Well, you briefly alluded to like the run by reading, if you will, where the child comes home from school and surprise, there's a book on your bed. And there are many books out there on teenage adolescence, puberty, development, all of those things. And Roby Harris is actually one of my favorite authors for that. She has a book series that runs from 3 all the way to 17. Obviously, the books are different. The first one being called It's Not the Stork. The second one, I think it's something like My Body. And they're great. They're very age appropriate. And my first demonstration of the parent and child actually having the conversation is the parent and child reading that book together. My caution to saying for the run by reading is that, again, you're giving the information without the context of meaning. So my biggest piece of advice would be, don't do that. I cannot reiterate enough, we get this very small window to pour into our child the values that we wish for them to carry forward throughout their lives. And sex is something that's going to affect them from now until the time that they die. Because it's a huge part of who we are. Again, it's all that innate biological yearning to continue the species. So that's not going to turn off or shift for the vast majority of people. So if you help your child to understand now that sex can be special, imagine the heartache that you can help your child to avoid.
That's absolutely beautiful and a lovely reminder for all of our parents why having this conversation with their teens, their daughters, is so, so important, because it is about that future relationship and making sex loving, special, and it's not to be taken lightly. Love it. Well, Tara, I would like if you could also tell our audience just a little bit about your online programs that you have. I know you've got specific ones for the age groups. And again, we're talking mostly the teenagers today, but I know you've got one for even younger kids to help support the parents, caregivers, grandparents about how to even have conversations about sex. Could you tell us a little more about what you have?
Yeah, absolutely. And the younger one is hopefully with the intent that by the time you get to those teenage years, you've already fostered such a platform of developing organic conversations that when stuff comes up, it gets addressed in the moment. You don't really have to plan or strategize, the talk, if you will, because it's just been bred into the fabric of your family. So the younger programs, one, are intended to do that. Two, they're intended to educate, and both of these do this actually, but they educate the parent on age-appropriate child development. Sexual development starts much younger than I think many parents realize, and that's normal. And so when your child starts to engage in anything from inappropriate talk to, oh, it's kind of funny to run around the house naked, what do you do when you're in those situations and moments to help your child through that developmental stage, and also teaching safety at the same time? So safety is a big part of both of the modules for the 0 to 10 and the 11 to 17, just in terms of let's hopefully prevent anything from happening. Mm-hmm. There's also a good bit of information in there on if you start to suspect or if you have some concerning behaviors that you don't feel like you can address without a measure of accountability. What do you do from there? And then finally, there's a live demonstration of a parent and child having the conversation. And what I love about these those clips, if you will, is they're not edited and they're not scripted.
Excellent.
So you get all the awkward pauses and the giggles, and the kids say things that, of course, you never expect them to say because that's what they do.
Yep.
Like I remember the 5-year-old little boy talked about how sometimes he gets an erection and he has to, it's weird and awkward and it happens in times he doesn't expect it. And so he kind of pushes it down. And that was the first time he and his mom had ever even remotely broached that subject. And so there was this look of shock and pause in mom's face, and then she moved on. So you get to see, it's real, and it's okay for it to take you back. And how do you respond when you're shocked?
Yeah. Oh, I love it.
Yeah. And then I give a resource and suggestion guide on setting the stage for successful conversations. For the little ones, it's a little bit more organic. Yes, there's the books, but there's also suggestions on how to have the conversation through play or by coloring, which makes it a little less of a formal, if you will, talk. For the teens, I focus mostly on it. Yes, the books are there, but I focus mostly on making it an interactive activity that infuses humor. So one suggestion I gave was Jeopardy, and I actually give you a Jeopardy template for you to kind of fill in with your own ideas, and that's the live demonstration, so you can see how it actually works if you choose that. But I also developed kind of like a questionnaire for the parent and the child, and the child answers it, and the parent has to kind of guess what the child would say, and then at the end they compare and contrast their answers. Beautiful. And see how accurate the parent was, and if there's anything shocking or surprising, how fun that will be to address. So in terms of the base modules, that's kind of it in a nutshell. There's 2 add-ons for parents that are dealing with very unique circumstances. One is parenting sexually abused and sexually reactive children. And the other is parenting children and teens who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender.
Yeah, so you've covered such a wide variety of, again, it's such an important topic, and it starts very young. And if there's other circumstances, like whether, it's abuse or trauma that has happened, or the gender identity piece of it, all of that Correct. Is there. And there's just different ways of having those conversations. So I love that you've got such a variety of choices for parents, caregivers, grandparents. If they choose to go out and get more support, they can. And they can do Correct. It really from the comforts of their own home. That's the purpose of having sometimes these online communities and online products, is that they don't have to necessarily go seek that out unless they need more. and more
Right.
support, they can totally do that.
Right. And particularly with the parenting sexually abused and sexually reactive, I talk a lot about kind of healing thyself for the caregiver, parent. If this is something that also happened to you, it's going to be really difficult for you to assist your child through the healing journey. So there's different points throughout the different modules where if it seems relevant at this juncture for the parent to recognize their own limitations, I'll make mention of possibly seeking out treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that, tell our audience, how can they find this information, or how could they get a hold of you? What's your website or your Facebook, or how do they contact you?
Yeah, we've already said it's online. So it's talksexwithme.com. Super simple. And you go on there and you can check out videos of the different modules and the different components of each of the modules. You can decide for you which is going to be the right one for your family. The base modules, you can either do a one-time payment or you can subscribe, which helps to split up the fee so it's a little bit more attainable for families who want a budget. And then the add-ons are just a one-time, and they're a lower fee. I think they're $124.99 a piece. And I always suggest that you also buy the base module because there's lots of information in those that is not addressed in the add-ons. And we want to make sure that we're also addressing kind of the value component of the family and making sure that that's sewn into the child's understanding of sex and sexuality.
Well, excellent. And again, I'll have this all on the show notes. So if you're out there driving, don't worry, it'll be out there so you can look that information up. And I just want to say thank you again for being on, Tara, and for providing our parents the information that it's truly okay to pause, have this conversation, begin the conversation if they've not already begun the conversation up with their daughter about sex and sexuality, and that it's okay to truly talk about, get comfortable with, so their daughters have good information as they continue to move forward in their journey in life, that they also have correct information, that they know that having a relationship with somebody needs to be loving, healthy, and that they can just have a more loving relationship, not only with their partner, but also with themselves. So thank you again.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me, Nicole.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode with Tara. And it's just a reminder, parents, that even though you may feel uncomfortable talking sex with your teenage daughter, it's so important. And the earlier you can start, the better. And it doesn't have to be so serious all the time. That it's, as Tara said, sometimes having some games or being able to talk about it when you're watching a movie together, that can help break the ice. Just a reminder, go out to launchingyourdaughter.com and sign up for my newsletter. The high school girls group is now going, which is great. And I'll be making some more announcements in the future for a possible middle school age girls group this summer. But for the moms out there, I've also got some free videos planned to help support you through this journey when your daughter is a teen or a tween. So again, go out to launchingyourdaughter.com, sign up for my newsletter, and I'll see you the next time. Thank you for listening to Launching Your Daughter with Nicole Burgess, licensed marriage and family therapist. For more information or to stay up to date, go to launchingyourdaughter.com. You can sign up for my email list or join my Facebook group. Thank you.